Friendsify you want to watch super hit movie The Nest in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Film Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Nest. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Film. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going totally apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. The Nest is a 2020 psychological dadier. A film written, directed, and produced by Sean Durkin. The film stars Jude, Carrie Coon, Charlie Shotwell, Oona Roche, and Adeel Akhtar. The Nest had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 26, 2020, and was released in the United States and Canada on September 18, 2020 by IFC Films and Elevation Pictures, respectively. Plot: in the late 1980s, Rory and Allison O'Hara live a middle-class life in New York City with their kids Samantha Sam and Benjamin Ben, the former born from Allison's previous relationship. Allison teaches horseback riding, while Rory works as a trader. Believing his opportunities in the States are limited, Rory persuades Allison to relocate with him to London, where he plans to return to the firm of his former employer, Arthur Davis. Despite Allison's initial misgivings, the family moves into a huge old mansion in Surrey, where Rory persuades Allison to start a horse farm on the property and brings her horse, Richmond, over from the States. Construction begins on a stable while Ben and Sam are enrolled in separate schools. Rory later takes Allison to high-class dinner parties with Arthur and his colleagues. However, the family has some difficulty adjusting, as their secluded location and respective commutes make it difficult for the children to get to school on time. Several weeks later, construction abruptly stops on the stable. Learning that Rory never paid the builders, Allison discovers that his bank account is nearly empty. Rory promises he will have money soon, but Allison is forced to provide for the family by cutting into her hidden cash fund. Allison bristles at Rory's efforts to appear high class while they remain nearly broke. At work, Rory proposes that Arthur sell his company to a larger American firm looking for a London office. After brief consideration, Arthur refuses. Back at the mansion, Richmond collapses in pain and Allison is forced to go to a neighboring farmer, who puts the horse down. Rather than go home following Arthur's rejection, Rory pays a visit to his mother, who shows no interest in his family and accuses Rory of abandoning her. Rory returns home late and gets into an argument with Allison over their financial woes and Rory's reckless, delusional behavior. In order to provide income to the household, Allison begins working as a farmhand. Allison's relationships with her children also become strained when Sam makes some disreputable friends and Ben gets into a fight with some school bullies. Rory and his colleague Steve arrange a potentially lucrative deal with a Norwegian fish farming corporation. That night, he and Allison attend a dinner with Steve and their prospective clients, while Sam and her friends throw a house party. As the party gets out of control, Ben flees outside and witnesses Richmond's carcass being pushed to the surface of the grave due to improper burial. During the dinner, Allison openly mocks Rory before leaving the restaurant, taking the car and getting drunk at a nightclub. Rory attempts to downplay Allison's behavior, but his clients opt to go into business with Steve while cutting him out. Rory tries to take a taxi back to Surrey and confesses his many indiscretions to the driver, claiming his job is pretending to be rich. With Rory's confessions making it clear that he is both broke and a liar, the driver anticipates that he will be unable to pay for the long fare and leaves him in the middle of nowhere. The next morning, Allison wakes up hungover in her parked car and drives home, finding the house trashed after the party. Ben shows her Richmond's grave, where the carcass has risen almost completely to the surface. As Allison breaks down over the grave, Sam and Ben agree to make breakfast. Rory finishes the long walk home and finds his family seated at the table. He starts proposing a new business idea and another relocation, but Allison tells him to stop. Rory breaks down in tears. Sam hugs him, then prepares a seat for him with them. Cast: Jude Law as Rory O'Hara, Carrie Coon as Allison O'Hara, Charlie Shotwell as Benjamin Ben O'Hara, Oona Roche as Samantha Sam O'Hara, Adeel Akhtar as Steve, Anne Reid as Rory's mum, Michael Culkin as Arthur Davis, Wendy Crewson as Allison's mum, Tatiana Jones as coach, John Ross Harkin and Tobias Macy as the builders, James Nelson Joyce as taxi driver, Tanya Allen as Margie. Production: the project was announced in April 2018, with Jude Law and Carrie Coon set to star for writer and director Sean Durkin. Filming began in September 2018 in Canada for 1 week before moving to England. The family mansion in the story was filmed at Nether Winchenden House in Buckinghamshire. Release: it had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 26, 2020. Shortly after, IFC Films acquired distribution rights to the film. It was theatrically released on September 18, 2020, and on video on demand (VOD) on November 17, 2020. In November 2023, The Nest was shown on BBC Two. Reception: box office. The Nest grossed $137,852 in North America and $1.1 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $1.2 million. Critical response: on the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 90% of 191 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 7.5s for 10. The website's consensus reads, "An effective pairing of period setting and timeless themes, The Nest wrings additional tension out of its unsettling story with an outstanding pair of lead performances." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 80 out of 100, based on 37 critics indicating generally favorable reviews. The Nest was screened at the 2020 Deauville American Film Festival, where it won the Grand Special Prize, the International Critics Prize, and the Revelation Prize. The film was named to the Toronto International Film Festival's year-end Canada's Top 10 list for feature films. The Nest review. Is it a ghost story? A parable of family dysfunction? Or perhaps a fever dream of neoliberalism's troubled birth in the Thatcher-Reagan 80s and the special relationship of greed and good? Or is this rivetingly strange movie an adaptation of some 70s or 80s novel that we had somehow all forgotten about? Something by Iris Murdoch, or maybe Piers Paul Reed? The Nest director is filmmaker Sean Durkin, his first since the intriguing quasi-Manson cult drama Martha Marcy May Marlene from 2011, and however much it feels like an adaptation, this is his own original screenplay, and very original. The setting is the mid-1980s, with news about President Reagan on the radio and everyone smoking indoors, and the story begins in the handsome suburban home in upstate New York of Rory O'Hara, an expatriate Briton played by Jude Law. He has made a fortune as a commodity trader in Manhattan, and one morning high-handedly tells his American wife Allison, Carrie Coon, stepdaughter Sam, Oona Roche, and young son Ben, Charlie Shotwell, that he has accepted a job offer from his old boss in the city of London. Restless, mercurial, fast-talking Rory evidently has a yen to return in triumph to his old stamping ground and maybe cautiously reconnect with his glowering widowed mum. A terrifically potent cameo from Anne Reid. And so the bewildered family leave the sunny U.S. for rainy old Britain, where Rory has rented a huge, dark, 18th century manor house in Surrey with first editions and paneled walls and secret passages, which he excitedly tells them was the temporary home of Led Zeppelin while they worked on an album. He encourages Allison to pursue her interest in horses here, and packs Ben off to the nearest posh school, where he has to wear a uniform with mortifyingly uncool short trousers, while sulky, mutinous Sam gets to go to the local comprehensive. But soon it is clear that Rory's job isn't going so well. Allison is angry and depressed, Sam is getting into drugs, and Ben is wetting the bed. And there are very disquieting, ghostly things happening in this absurd, stately home. symptoms of psychic pain that are also being intuited by Alison's horse. No one actually calls this house the Nest, and a less nest-like home can hardly be imagined. Uncomfy, uncozy, unwelcoming, and unhappy. Or perhaps the point is that nests are exactly like this, in the wild. Certainly, there's something utterly bizarre in the simple transplanting of this happy, prosperous, corn-fed American family into a dank, drowsy mausoleum, the kind of place that poor, unsatisfied Rory needs to persuade himself that he has properly made it, commuting every day and drinking pensive lagers on the train. While Rory is in the office, doing boozy lunches or going to Arsenal games with his old mate Steve, Adeel Akhtar, and recklessly spending on the expectation of some big deal, it's Alison and the kids who are back in this creepy old mansion, unsure as to why the tradesmen aren't getting paid and the checks are bouncing. She is wondering, are they in fact terribly poor? And the creature who senses all this in a series of surreal and shockingly unpleasant sequences is Alison's horse, Richmond, whose burial scene is one of the most disturbing things I have seen this year. You watch as the perfect Anglo-American family teeters on the edge of emotional bankruptcy. This is a film that swerves away from categorization. It's an 80s set picture that wears its period locations and its musical references lightly. It's a city trader film where the main bad guy doesn't do coke, and it's a scary movie whose disturbing supernatural interludes happen almost incidentally, a sideshow to the emotional collapse. Is there any hope for Rory and Alison? That's the question at the heart of The Nest, a wrenching, beautiful drama about a married couple who relocate from upstate New York to a drafty old estate near London, where their union unravels. The marriage of Rory and Alison, Jude Law and Carrie Coon, was already frayed, but the spouses were so comfortable with the family's routines and so immersed in their own pursuits, he's an investment banker, she raises horses and teaches riding, that the warning signs didn't register. Their relocation to England, where Rory grew up, is a black light pointed at a crime scene. It's impossible not to see everything that's gone wrong. Their kids see it too. The eye-rolling teenage disaffection of their elder daughter, Sam, Oona Roche, a girl fathered by Alison's first husband, becomes overt once the move to England is complete, and slowly turns into blatant cynicism, hostility, and rebellion. Roche's narrow-eyed stare whenever her parents have a go at special pleading is one of the film's most devastating recurring images. Her face is judgment. Rory and Alison's youngest, the sweet and sensitive Ben, Charlie Shotwell, withdraws into himself, and you may start to fear for his physical safety, especially if you've seen Ordinary People. The actor has a young Timothy Hutton vibe. Writer-director Sean Durkin, Martha Marcy May Marlene, has delivered the cinematic equivalent of those substantial, long yet not too long short stories that says everything about its subject without actually saying everything. Or, perhaps conversely, a poem or song that takes you through stages, aspects of a magnetic but destructive relationship, like Stephen Sondheim's Sorry Grateful from Company, or Bob Dylan's Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts from Blood on the Tracks. Durkin's script and direction are as economical and exact as they are compassionate and merciless, feeling for these characters without pandering to the audience by constantly proclaiming their lovability. The cinematography by Matthias Erdely, editing by Matthew Hannum, and score by Arcade Fire's Richard Reed Parry are all on the same page, it seems. There's nothing fussy about any creative choice. As devastating as The Nest often is, the sheer beauty of individual moments is still elating. And that beauty is encapsulated in the simplicity and rightness of what each moment choose to focus on, whether it's the sounds of Rory's anxious breathing in his dress shoes crumping on a gravel road as he walks home in silhouette at dawn after staying out in the city all night, or the creeping zoom shots that make it seem as if an unseen, icy intelligence is surveilling the family, or the wide shot of the drunk, rebellious Alison dancing alone among strangers in a nightclub, or the long shot of Ben hiding in a cluttered room to escape his sister's unauthorized decadent party, or anything involving Alison and her beloved horses. Law, who co-produced and championed the film, gives one of his greatest performances as Rory. The character feels like the sum total of every major role he's played till now, from the Gatsby-like golden boy in The Talented Mr. Ripley, to the title character in the remake of Alfie, to Pope Pius XIII on HBO's The Young Pope, the ultimate salesman. There's a touch of Mad Men hero Don Draper in here as well. Rory grew up working class to poor, and is great at using his looks and charisma to sell things. But he sucks at details, and he's so obsessed with appearing prosperous that he neglects the mathematical facts of what things cost and pulls his wife and kids into ill-advised gambles. Burt Lancaster fans will appreciate the project's spiritual kinship with Lancaster's late cult classic, The Swimmer, not just because of the Mad Men connection. That series writers often turn to John Cheever's fiction for inspiration, but because of the script's keen balance of direct factual observation. Here is what the characters did, action by action, line by line, and plausibly deniable allusions to mythology, legend, and scripture. You think about what things mean in a larger sense, even though the film/story never footnotes things for you. Law's performance is Lancaster-ish, or Swimmer adjacent as well, in that it's animated not just by a set of choices, but a philosophy, a vision of life, and perhaps also a self-inventory that connected the character of Rory to aspects of himself, as flattering or unflattering as the resulting realizations must have been. Coon equals, and in some ways exceeds Law here. It's the more altogether impressive performance because she's comparatively new to us. Her breakthroughs were on HBO's The Leftovers and the third season of FX's Fargo. As Allison, she gives us performance as grounded, nervy, vulnerable, and technically flawless as any we've seen from more established actresses, and in a different mode from the roles that put her on critics' and viewers' radar. Coon has 4, maybe 5 scenes in The Nest where her work is so focused and simple, in the sense of being direct and unadorned, not crude or simplistic, that they could stand for the movie in its totality. The greatest is a dinner scene near the end of the film. Rory has cajoled and compelled Allison to accompany him as he and a co-worker, Steve, a sturdy and affecting supporting performance by Adeel Akhtar, to help them win over clients who could bring a lot of money into their company. Rory, who's racked by financial instability and marital desperation at that point, tries way too hard, essentially giving a bad performance as Rory. He presents himself as a man of culture and taste who appreciates the finer things, but comes off as a yob cosplaying a sophisticate. Allison, who's had enough of his delusions, can't play along anymore, and lets her seething resentment of Rory escape in biting asides, like steam puffs from a kettle that's about to shriek. This is a lead performance in the vein of Gena Rowland's work with John Cassavetes in the 1970s. It's not just the character's closed-off intensity or nervous cigarette smoking or feathery blonde hair that puts the comparison across. It's the way Coon lets you not just understand, but feel what Allison is feeling. Not in a showy or hand-holding way, by indicating or underlining or calling attention to the technical part of the performance, but seemingly without any forethought having been given to how the viewer could perceive anything. Indeed, whether anyone might be watching at all. You feel Allison in the way that you'd feel what a close friend was feeling if you were in the same room with her. This is not the same thing as saying it's an agreeable or light or upbeat performance. Allison is a lot to take. She loves her kids and seems like a fundamentally decent person. But she's in denial about her own materialistic tendencies, which she offloads onto the more flagrantly acquisitive Rory, and she's so wrapped up in herself and her disintegrating codependent marriage that she doesn't really notice her kids' pain in the way that a mother should. That being said, she's a far better mother than Rory is a father. And maybe because breakup stories with a charismatic anti-hero tend to pull sympathy towards the husband-boyfriend, is this encoded in the gendered nature of mainstream filmmaking or the culture at large? Durkin gives us just one scene where the Nest tells us what to think. A cab driver listens to Rory's self-serving tale of woe and calls bullshit. "I'm a good father," Rory says, in a drunken whine, then goes on to declare that he puts food on the table and roof over his children's heads. "That's the bare minimum you should do, mate," the cab driver says in a prelude to one of the most unexpectedly satisfying bits of almost extra-dramatic commentary I've seen in a mainstream drama. The cab driver, standing in for the viewer, and for everyone in Rory's life, says, in effect, "Enough, we're done." The Nest clocks in at a brisk hour and 45 minutes. But in the memory, it feels much longer in a good way, because every scene, moment, line, and gesture stands for so many things at once and exists on so many levels at once, without making a big deal of how much data and meaning is being conveyed. That the story is set in the 1980s, the era of go-go Reaganism and Thatcherism, prepares us for a lecture on capitalism's failures that never arrives. This is a period movie, not a thesis statement. The result ranks with cinema's best Marshall breakup stories, up there with Shoot the Moon, likewise built upon a Yankee-Brit union. The final scene, set as in so many perfect movies about the complexity of family relationships at the breakfast table, is just right. It ends on a note of potentiality, not certainty. This lets viewers argue for or against the possibility or advisability of the marriage repairing itself or accepting failure and moving on. By the time the end arrives, the parents, the children, and the viewers are in alignment about the state of things. The relief that accompanies such a realization lets a tale of escalating discomfort end on a note of, well, not hope, exactly. Realism, acceptance. Like driving around in a car that's been neglected for months or years and that has a lot of things wrong with it, then finally admitting, on the side of the road, in the rain, in the dark, that you'd ignored warning signs for too long and have no one to blame for this disaster but yourself. You don't root for anyone in this movie. It's not the sort of movie that cares whether you approve of its characters, only that you understand them. I saw The Nest on a screener thanks to IFC Films, and the premise intrigued me immediately. Jude Law and Carrie Coon life play husband and wife whose already fragile marriage take a twisted turn after moving into an English country manor. The film opens when the family still resides in the U.S. Rory O'Hara, Law, is shown taking the kids to school, and Allison Coon works as a horse trainer. The O'Hara seems like the perfect family. Live in a nice house with a pool and everything seems normal. Rory seems like the perfect dad to his young son Ben, Charlie Shotwell, and their daughter Sam, Oona Roche, seems like a typical angsty teen. Then suddenly one morning, Rory tells Allison he wants to move back to England. It's not clear at first just what it is Rory does, but he assures his wife that she'd never have to work and they can live like royalty. Despite her initial refusal, Allison agrees to uproot her family to England. They even take mover horse Richmond all the way across the Atlantic. Once they're in the UK, Rory excitedly gives his family a tour to a large farm mansion in the London suburb of Surrey. I kind of get a devil's advocate vibe, and the mood of the film, which decidedly shot like a horror film by cinematographer Matthias Erdely, son of Saul, makes it look like there's something ominous about the house. There's even a moment where Allison screamed to her kids, "You both are strangers to me," after hearing noises in the house at night, which seems to come out of nowhere. I wonder if perhaps Durkin is saying that the real horror of this family breakdown has nothing to do with the house or external forces. That real evil can come from within each person. Set in the early 80s during Thatcher-Reagan era, the film's theme plays with the idea of the American dream and "fake it until you make it" adage, and we later learn Rory's lucrative job as a commodity broker is what he thinks would enable him to achieve the dream he's imagined for himself and his family. Without giving too much away, The Nest is family drama cautionary tale of greed and ambition run amok. It's as if this is the antithesis to the famous line from Wall Street that greed is good. Well, we don't have to watch this film to realize that, but filmmaker Sean Durkin hammers that message quite potently here. This is the first of Durkin's work I've seen so far, which is his sophomore writing-directing feature film he did since the highly acclaimed Martha Marcy May Marlene. I think Durkin is a talented filmmaker and has a pretty unique storytelling style. The way the tension keeps on building and using Allison's horse as a metaphor for their crumbling marriage is pretty effective. That said, I'm not seeing the film as without flaws. For one, the pacing is quite slow, and while I don't mind slow films, there's a sense of dread and unnecessary doom and gloom feel that makes the film seem lethargic. There are also some events happening in the film that seem foreboding, but in the end amount to nothing, which isn't frustrating necessarily. I just find it quite odd. I think some viewers would also find it quite frustrating that there's no truly sympathetic characters in this film, except for the subtle gesture of kindness from Sam towards the end. I like Allison, and she's quite a strong female figure. But the way she finally snaps at Rory during a client meeting doesn't exactly paint her character in a compassionate light. She also seems far more obsessed with her horse than she is with her kids, at least the way it's presented in the film. The strong point in this film is definitely the performances. Jude Law is believable as a man with delusions of grandeur and unbridled ambition to get to the top. Though at times Rory's actions seems absurd, you don't completely hate the man. In fact, I feel really sorry for him. The conversation with the Uber Lyft driver is quite a turning point for Rory, and perhaps one of my favorite scenes in the film. Carrie Coon is an actress I'm not familiar with at all. Apparently she was in Avengers Infinity War, but unrecognizable in CG makeup as one of Thanos' warrior minions. But I'm very impressed with her here. There's an effortlessly cool vibe about her, and she has a palpable chemistry with Law. British-Pakistani actor Adeel Akhtar and Irish actor Michael Culkin are both reliable character actors, and both lend memorable performances as Rory's colleague and boss, respectively. Overall, I admire Durkin's talent as a filmmaker, even though I'm not overly fond of the film. As I mentioned above, there's a sense of dread throughout, so this one isn't exactly a pleasant film to watch. I'd still recommend it to film enthusiasts as I think it's well crafted, though I'm not sure this film would be a hit with mainstream audiences despite Jude Law being in it. The Nest is the first feature Sean Durkin has written and directed since his formidable debut, the cult detox drama Martha Marcy May Marlene 2011. The long wait burdens the new movie with high expectations. In contrast to the dreamlike subjectivity of Martha Marcy, The Nest is a coldly observational study of a Reagan-Thatcher-era family divided in ambitions, nationality, and, with respect to the children, parentage. The British Rory, Jude Law, a rapacious financier in the United States, talks his American wife Allison, Carrie Coon, into moving to England with their kids, Oona Roche and Charlie Shotwell. Without consulting her, he splurges on a farm mansion in Surrey whose ludicrously large and creepy grounds have little use beyond projecting ultra-conspicuous consumption. Allison resents Rory's paternalism and British society's encouragement of it, and Coon embodies an extraordinary range of self-loathing, simmering anger, and doubt. Durkin smartly leans on her performance, in a long take, for instance, that observes her face as she realizes Rory misled her about his job offer's origins. Law, though, is miscast. He has the smarm but not the charm of a compulsive grifter, even a hapless one. In a grimly funny scene, he unsuccessfully pitches his estranged mother, Anne Reed, on meeting her grandson, now 10. In technique, The Nest is severe but unimpeachable. From the carefully paralleled shots of Law awaking Coon at different houses to the Seska chairs that subtly signify comfort and time period at family meals, notably the breakfast scenes at the beginning and end. If Durkin's writing doesn't always match his formal flair, The Nest has a bracing economy, cramming a lot into tight quarters. Jude Law's glittering and insincere salesman smile has rarely been better used than in Sean Durkin's prickly domestic drama The Nest. As brash British city boy Rory, he blasts the full force of his skin-deep charm, arms outstretched, as he welcomes his American family to the 17th century Surrey mansion he has leased for a year, with the option to buy. Having unilaterally decided to relocate them all from a comfortable life in Mull, New York, back to the UK to take advantage of the imminent deregulation of the 1980s financial market, Rory is fully invested in the move to this crumbling pile. The ostentatious, impractical house with its jutting turrets and the vacant Valium gaze of its windows is a core part of the oversized identity that Rory is crafting for himself. It's not a home, It's a waymarker on a social climb, a capricious trophy wife of a building. No wonder, then, that the mansion starts to feel as malign in its way as the Shining's Overlook Hotel. As he already demonstrated with his accomplished feature debut, Martha Marcy May Marlene, writer and director Durkin is supremely accomplished when it comes to subtly modulated tonal shifts. With the introduction of a discordant note in the upmarket restaurant jazz that constitutes the film's sly score, plaudits to Arcade Fire's Richard Reed Parry for creating music that sounds both impeccably tasteful and witheringly sarcastic, there's the hint of an imbalance that undermines the family's foundations in their new home. A mid-shot that catches the face of Rory's wife Allison, Fargo's Carrie Coon, as she chews over the bitter realization that her husband has lied to her, lowers the temperature in the scenes that follow by several degrees. The use of the unsympathetic architecture of the building is particularly effective. A shot of a child's toy dragged along a brick parapet creates a lurch of foreboding. The corridors of the house soak up light like blotting paper, shadows eat away at the edge of the frame, and the sunny enthusiasm in Rory's 10-year-old son Ben gradually dims. Not that Rory notices that his son is miserably closing in on himself. His stepdaughter, Sam, Oona Roche, is falling in with a bad crowd, and his wife's eyes ice over when he speaks on her behalf. He's riding the high of being the prodigal son returned, the big New York fish about to make waves across the Atlantic. A rising star in an industry in which well-lunched men talk about vision but mean greed, Rory has bought into his own self-created mythology at the top of the market. And markets have a tendency to crash. The performances have a complex angularity throughout, but Law in particular is terrific in this slippery role. A scene in which he visits his estranged mother, Anne Reed, on magnificently toxic form, is pure discomfort. A ringside seat at a verbal duel between two equally matched narcissists. And even in less successful scenes, a taxi ride wake-up call to his conscience that was evidently written by someone who has never met a London cabbie, Law manages to be both utterly authentic and glossily untrustworthy. Durkin flirts with the cinematic language of horror. The camera creeps incrementally towards the gaping yawn of the gates to the house as, out of frame, Allison's beloved $5,000 thoroughbred horse bellows its terror. But if there are malignant forces at work, they are perhaps cultural rather than supernatural, the same ones that underpin Thatcherism and Reaganomics. The Nest is a belated cautionary tale. This tainted family is a skeleton in the closet of our current socioeconomic climate. Back in 2011, writer-director Sean Durkin made a splash with his feature film debut, Martha Marcy May Marlene. The small-budget psychological drama not only introduced a fresh new filmmaker, but it was the eye-opening first film for Elizabeth Olsen. Martha wowed most critics with its handling of mental trauma and cult life. Yet to this day, I still grit my teeth at its abrupt, unsatisfying ending, a frustrating exercise in ambiguity that's simply too clever for its own good. It's been almost 10 years since Martha, and we finally get Durkin's follow-up. The Nest is a slow-burning family drama that dangles genre teases in front of us like a carrot. Sometimes it hints at being a thriller, other times a horror film. In reality, its thrills are muted, and the horror is of a deeply human nature. The tension it builds is relational rather than supernatural, personal instead of maniacal. It's channeled through the story's centerpiece, a corroding relationship between a husband and wife. Durkin digs deep into the minutiae of married life, showing the slow, steady decay of a once-loving union and the unsettling effects it has on their entire family. Jude Law has always possessed a disarming charm, and Durkin uses it to the fullest. He's in top form here, playing Rory O'Hara, a commodities broker in a state of disillusionment. Everything looks ideal. He has an attractive and seemingly happy family living well above the poverty line. The money's great and they have a nice house. His wife Allison enjoys being close to her family and training horses while their two kids Ben, Charlie Shotwell, and stepdaughter Sam, Oona Roche, love where they are. Then Rory drops the line, "Things aren't working for me here." He's had a taste of the American dream and it wasn't filling. So when a business opportunity opens up in London, he decides to uproot his family from their comfortable suburban life and move overseas. Allison is rightfully frustrated. It'll be their fourth move in 10 years. Yet she goes along with it, doing what a good wife is expected to do in the mid-1980s. Her mother even tells her, "It's not your job to worry. You leave that to your husband." I should mention, the movie doesn't explicitly tell us when it's set, but it's clear by mentions of President Reagan on newscasts, Hart and the Thompson twins playing on the radio, and by someone using an actual rotary phone. You older readers remember those, right? Durkin gives us a good example of how to use a time period without exploiting it or overusing nostalgic callbacks. The first thing Rory does in England is rent out a massive country estate in Surrey. Can they afford it? He certainly lives like it, but Allison knows better. She has long played the role of the dutiful wife, supporting her husband while setting aside her own ambitions. But under the surface, she's an intelligent, strong-willed woman who's starting to see through her husband's facade. She knows something is out of whack. When she begins noticing inconsistencies with his stories and behavior, she questions him. His responses are telling. "I deserve this," he screams, like a petulant, entitled child. Coons is fantastic, and we see much of the film through her eyes. But we also get some interesting changes in perspective. At first, it seems like the story is being told from Rory's point of view, but it quickly shifts to Allison, who carries us through most of the movie. But then when you least expect it, the film makes yet another transition in the final act. But it's still Coons who anchors our sympathies and gives us the most clear-eyed insight. While The Nest may throw off those expecting a more traditional psychological thriller, I was hooked thanks its two penetrating lead performances and Sean Durkin's meticulous handling of their characters. Unfortunately, like Martha, Durkin's latest doesn't end on the strongest note, leaving us to do more speculating than deep thinking. The story slowly and methodically builds the tension before coming to a screeching stop. Of course, there is artistic intent behind the abrupt finish, but as a viewer, it left me feeling a little unsatisfied. The Nest opens September 18th in select theaters and November 17th on VOD. All work and no play makes Rory O'Hara a dull boy, which is to say one can scarcely overlook the connections between Sean Durkin's subtly unsettling second feature, The Nest, and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, even if this is by far the more tedious of the two movies. While the obsessive dad Jude Law plays here doesn't fly off the handle quite so spectacularly as Jack Nicholson did, the horror hits closer to home, since what's haunting the O'Haras isn't supernatural. Rather, this family's unraveling, which likewise follows a big move to a spooky new abode, has more to do with all the baggage they've brought with them. 9 years after Martha Marcy May Marlene, an unnerving art house chiller that's since achieved cult status among cinephiles, Durkin returns to the Sundance Film Festival with a movie that's considerably more challenging and arguably more accomplished as well, although paying audiences aren't likely to appreciate the crystalline intricacy of what he's trying to achieve here. That's because The Nest is not a traditional genre movie after all, although it may feel like one going in. Those seeking boogie scares would do well to adjust their expectations. Commercial prospects are iffier than shares in a Norwegian fish farm during a recession, which is a shame since the meticulously mounted film won't translate well to the small screen and feels like a no-go for streaming. The real point of comparison between The Nest and a movie like The Shining lies in the psychological toll that a selfish father can have on his family. In a sense, T has more in common with Marriage Story or The Souvenir, films about destructive male ego told at least in part from a female point of view. Rory may be the first character we meet, but the movie ultimately favors Allison, Carrie Coon, the screw-turning wife seemingly conjured from one of those ghostly classics where sinister things happen when a family relocates to freaky new digs. One day, after at least a decade spent living in the States, English-born Rory announces that he plans to uproot Allison and their two kids, son Ben, Charlie Shotwell, and stepdaughter Sam, Oona Roche, in order to pursue an opportunity back in London. Although she sincerely loves her husband, Allison is justified when she tells her mother, "Something doesn't feel right." "It's not your job to worry," Mom tells her. "Leave that to your husband." It's a telling line, and one that reflects widespread attitudes of the period in which The Nest is set. Durkin, who spent time in both England and the U.S. as a child, sets the film in the mid-1980s, when women were expected to honor their husbands, and divorce wasn't nearly so common. The movie opens with a long shot of a spacious suburban home with 2 cars parked in its driveway. The O'Haras are living the dream, the American dream, which Durkin indicates via clues that audiences aren't necessarily attuned to interpreting. It doesn't help that perks that seemed like luxuries 35 years ago are now taken for granted. Back then, how many homes had automated espresso machines in their kitchens? Ours didn't even have a VCR. Rory has achieved a level of economic and emotional success that allows the O'Haras to live more comfortably than the vast majority of Americans. But it's not enough. Not for Rory. He's found a posh mansion in Surrey, England, which he rents for more than he can afford. Allison's concern heightens when she sees the place, whereas the kids, oblivious to the family's finances, are intimidated by the house itself, which could be haunted. The suggestion is a red herring, mind you, although a handful of scenes involving Allison's horse may leave permanent scars upon your psyche. Rory works in finance. Complex calculations of risk and reward are his specialty. But in this case, he's gambling on his family's comfort and happiness. "I had a she-childhood, and I deserve this," he bellows late in the film. That line, plus a visit to his mother, whom he hasn't seen in years, reveal an awful lot about his motivations. Rory wants his mom to see his new home, to meet the beautiful blonde American gal he married, and to show his son the affection that Rory was denied. He conveniently neglects to mention Sam, who isn't his biological daughter, and whom he sends to a so-so high school, while paying for Ben to attend the best private academy around. When she married Rory, Allison never imagined that her own identity would be so eclipsed by what pop philosopher Alain de Botton dubbed status anxiety. His is a seemingly incurable case. The harder Rory tries to prove himself to others, the more dangerous he becomes to his own family. There's a reason Allison hides her money from her husband. Tapping into the dark side of his own allure, Law's great in the role, although the scenes Durkin uses to dramatize Rory's downward spiral will drive most folks to boredom. Coon tends to be more captivating. She starts out an unequal partner, but slowly assumes more power as her husband loses control of a situation he created. Collaborating with Hungarian cinematographer Matthias Erdely, Miss Bala, son of Saul, Durkin maintains a chilly distance from his characters for much of the film. There are exceptions, including a more tightly framed sex scene designed to suggest the connection that we hope will carry the couple through the challenges ahead. But most of the time, The Nest feels clinical, requiring audiences to put in a level of detective work that even the O'Haras haven't committed to their own cause. Movies almost never deal with the intricacies of marriage, finances, schooling, finding the right work-life balance. By contrast, The Nest burrows into the minutiae, and the rewards of going along with the O'Haras are worth it, at least for those willing to risk the frustration of a movie that plays by its own rules and doesn't necessarily believe in happy endings. In the most fulfilling way, The Nest is a drama without an obvious hook. It doesn't depend on a catchy device or an overemphasized theme to give it purpose. Rather, it relies on well-constructed characters and the inherent drama of family dynamics. Writer-director Sean Durkin, whose debut Martha Marcy May Marlene in 2011 had such a hook with its account of cult brainwashing, considers what happens to a family when their circumstances change for the worse. But Durkin's second feature film has an atmosphere of interpersonal drama, not easily distilled into a logline that does its characters justice. The film revolves around complicated people who often behave in ways that betray their image of themselves. They're played by actors capable of integrating the many facets of their roles, performed with fascinating details and deviations, into full-fledged human beings. Durkin carefully avoids telegraphing a lesson to his audience in his screenplay for The Nest, concentrating instead on behavior that represents a sublime mix of acid and affection. Jude Law and Carrie Coon star as a married couple worthy of John Cassavetes and Gena Rowlands, though Durkin's aesthetic proves far more mannered than Cassavetes. Set in the late 1980s in the midst of Reaganism, the film follows Rory Law, an investment broker who lives in upstate New York with his wife Allison Coon, who trains horses for a living. They own fine things of the period, including a cordless phone, an espresso maker, and other signs of a privileged life. They seem so wrapped up in their routines and acquisition of objects that the distance between them almost goes unnoticed. Their children, the teenage Sam, Oona Roche, Allison's daughter from another relationship, and their adolescent son Ben, Charlie Shotwell, get along with playfully mocking jabs made with apparent sibling warmth underneath. On the surface, the family has charmed interactions filled with good humor. The way they share sandwiches is particularly endearing. And yet, The Nest opens with an agitated sequence with Rory, the motivations of which will remain unclear until a devastating moment. Feeling sour about his life in the United States, Rory wants to move back to London, where he's convinced he can advance their fortune at his old firm under his former mentor, Michael Culkin. Reluctantly, the family joins him at a massive estate on the English countryside with 17th century floors and Elizabethan furniture. Rory has paid a year's rent in advance, purchased a chinchilla coat for Allison to soften the blow, and arranged for his son to be in the best school around. But the move is like cutting stitches before the wound can heal. Soon everything opens and begins to rot. Sam changes sharply, transitioning into a rebellious phase that isolates her brother. Ben retreats inward, wetting the bed and getting into trouble at school. Allison plans to build a stable on the estate's property, but the horse Rory purchased for her behaves strangely. And the workers hired to build the structure stop showing up because Rory's checks have bounced. Their bank account has run dry, depleted by Rory to appear prosperous. However, this practical problem accentuates their relationship's deeper issues. Durkin's direction avoids anything that might be considered flashy or overstated. What's apparent is that he has arranged every component to support his story and its emotional impact. There's not a moment or artistic choice that doesn't align with the cohesive whole. Shooting with tangible 35mm, cinematographer Maciej Erdeli captures the family's new home in earthy browns and shadows that could be mistaken for a haunted house movie. The old dark estate isn't quite creepy to the viewer, though Sam and Ben describe it so. Still, there's an emptiness inside that heightens every human interaction, allowing its actors to inhabit almost stage-like spaces that never feel like home, just a place they're living. Other formal touches, such as the quiet, almost non-existent score by Richard Reed Parry from Arcade Fire, tend to recede, allowing the actors and their on-screen immediacy to take over. Scenes inside their vast home have been blocked to underscore the place's excess next to the family's needs, which proves stifling and even unnerving, while at the same time revealing the broader problems at the center of their family. It's tempting and not altogether off base to read The Nest as an indictment of American capitalism and its potentially destructive you-can-be-anything attitude as a gateway to success addiction. Rory, who comes from the classist British culture that considers your lineage before your talent, resents his modest roots and used the so-called land of opportunity to make a small fortune thanks to deregulation and ruthless Gordon Gekko-style brokering. "I had $1 million once," he moans later. But upon returning to London, he discovers that pushy deals and bombastic brags don't have the same effect. In one of his best performances, Law plays these scenes brilliantly. It's as though we see the 1980s version of Brad Strand, his character from I Heart Huckabees 2004, before he discovers his soul. Strand repeatedly tells a story about Shania Twain and a chicken salad sandwich to impress his business connections. Rory tells all manner of tall tales about his family's penthouse in New York or seeing stage productions at the National Theatre in London, but his clients aren't impressed. His desperate need to project success is matched by his hostility when Allison confronts his pretenses in a cruel dinner scene. "You're embarrassing," he tells her. "You're exhausting." She replies, "The sheer talent on display by the Nest's two leads cannot be overstated. Law excels at playing charismatic, morally bankrupt characters, from Dickie Greenleaf in The Talented Mr. Ripley, 1999, to his roles in Sleuth, 2007, Contagion, 2011, and other theatrical roles. He makes Rory despicable, yet not undeserving of our empathy. Rory may be saddled with a drive that betrays him, but he's a tragic figure. Law's bright, sad eyes remind us that he's not a monster." Coon, best known from HBO's The Leftovers and the third season of FX's Fargo, gives a powerhouse performance in her balance of Allison's fierce independence and her refusal to admit how much she savors the finer things. In one scene, she reels over the loss of her horse to an unsympathetic Rory. "He was a living, breathing animal, and he died," she cries, neatly compartmentalizing the 150 or so chinchillas it took to make the coat she initially wears, before it becomes a symbol of Rory's desire to appear cultured. With masterful body language and expression, Coon shows us that, in her way, Allison remains just as obsessed with appearances and dismissive of the problems in her marriage as Rory. "Everything's good," she insists to her children, who know everything's going wrong. Neither Rory nor Allison can see their destructive codependence, and the actors render this with perfect clarity. Elsewhere, Durkin reveals additional facets in scenes that explore his character's complexity, all while avoiding expositional dialogue and overt statements about what's happening. He uses what might be described as transitional moments of Allison driving and smoking, riding her horse, or working on a nearby farm to contrast the role that Rory wants her to play in their financial situation. Somehow, Allison is a strong woman who resigns herself to bad advice from her mother, Wendy Crewson. "It's not your job to worry about money. That's your husband's job." She dresses in elegant attire and makeup to look the role, and yet she rallies against social decorum to monumental effect at one dinner before escaping to a club to dance by herself. Rory's desire for success may seem to have suppressed all other emotional ties until he visits a long-neglected mother, Anne Reed, and beckons her to have a role in his life again, albeit to no avail. Durkin's screenplay recalls the domestic thrillers of Asghar Farhadi, A Separation, where layers of the onion continue to peel away as the narrative progresses, gradually exposing the characters in all their entanglements. We learn early in the film that relocating to London marks their fourth move in a decade. The pattern repeats itself, even though the events in the Nest seem to bring the couple to an impasse. It's unclear whether these events represent yet another lap around the same track in the larger race of their lives together, or if this story remains an isolated and intensified climax after which nothing will be the same. Durkin's screenplay is deliciously ambiguous about this, leaving much up to the viewer to decide. "Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down," explains Rory. The film opens as Rory finds himself unsatisfied with merely being up and nagged by a desire to be on top. He's blind to everything else. Later, during a cab ride after a disastrous business dinner, Rory laments his situation to the driver, arguing that at least he's the best father. "I keep a roof over their head, I give them the best of everything, and I've never laid a hand on them," he explains. The driver responds, "That's the bare minimum, mate. Don't pat yourself on the back for that." By the end, Durkin finds a kind of acceptance for his characters, just as his viewers must accept that The Nest isn't a closed book of a film. He doesn't offer a traditionally satisfying conclusion or happily ever after answer to what the previous 107 minutes of screen time mean. It's unclear whether the slowly building volatile events we've just witnessed will result in a divorce, supply the family with a catalyst to change, or will represent the latest down in their ongoing saga of ups and downs. Though the parents and their children appear settled in the last shot, we cannot help but ponder about what will happen next. Durkin has thoroughly implanted these characters in our minds, giving them a place to live and breathe long after the film is over. We're left thinking about the intricate performances and how the many dark corners of their home, beautifully captured on camera, reflect each family member. Told with the economy and tightly wound drama of a chilly theatrical style, The Nest is the sort of film that burrows in the mind, demanding that the viewer invest themselves in a challenging but rewarding excavation. A flashy commodities trader relocates his American family back to his home nation of Britain, where he attempts to seal a deal that will set them up for life. More than 30 years after Gordon Gekko declared in Wall Street that greed, for a lack of a better word, is good, cinema hasn't lost any of its appetite for taking a shot at capitalism. In Sean Durkin's new 1980s set thriller The Nest, the avatar for the horrors of financial excess is Jude Law's swaggering commodities trader Rory O'Hara, a man addicted to living beyond his means. The film introduces him as an avatar of the American dream, living in a beautiful house with his beautiful family. But the money has run out. Rory confides in his wife, Allison, Carrie Coon, that they're struggling to make ends meet, but he has been offered a chance to work with his former boss, Michael Culkin, if they are willing to up sticks and jet back to England. Soon, Rory has paid a year's rent on a cavernous Surrey mansion once used by Led Zeppelin while they were recording an album, and he's waist-deep in any number of schemes to make them rich. Law's performance perfectly essays the excruciating desperation of a man who has to keep moving in search of the next success, like a perpetually unsatisfied shark. He slithers and slimes through the movie, riding a wave of inch-thick sleaze, relishing the opportunity to pontificate about the benefits of Thatcher's financial deregulation and to throw out phrases like pied-à-terre and Mayfair as if they sit comfortably in his mouth. It's a terrific performance of pure macho bravado, but one upstaged by the even more impressive work quietly being done by Carrie Coon. It would have been easy for Allison to be a passive victim in this movie, someone buffeted by the hailstorm of her husband's extravagances and cons. But in the hands of Durkin's script and Coon's performance, the character becomes somebody much more interesting. There's an acidic bitterness at her core, most notably conveyed via her pithy clapbacks to the uptight, sexist microaggressions of Britain's upper crust. She becomes increasingly isolated and lonely throughout the film, and Coon is able to communicate this with palpable heart, even though she shares most of her scenes with a horse. Sadly, Durkin's movie is a rather inconsistent vessel for its towering lead performances. Initially, the signs are good, with Durkin building an atmosphere of mystery and tension similar to the foreboding darkness at the heart of his debut feature, Martha Marcy May Marlene. Ultimately, though, this tension feels like a wave that never crests and leaves the film feeling as if it lacks a thesis beyond a broad strokes critique of the ways in which capitalism dehumanizes and consumes those with ambitions of social mobility. Indeed, interesting threads around that theme are tossed aside far too easily. The movie introduces Rory's mother, played by the incomparable veteran Thesp Ann Reed, in a glimpse at Rory's less privileged past, but never delves any further into how that shaped him as an adult. Instead, there's a hilariously ham-fisted scene in which Rory is taken to task on his bluster and bombast by a taxi driver in a sort of grotesque caricature of the ordinary man. Perhaps Durkin saw the Churchill on a train scene in Darkest Hour and decided he wanted some of that nonsense. It's a shame that The Nest simply peters out, as it has many of the ingredients for an incisive and sharp drama. Law and Coon are each doing some of their best work in years, and there's an enthralling atmosphere to the film's opening hour. But Durkin resists conventional narrative structure to such an extent that the tension and intrigue dissipates amid the escalating mania of Law's character. When the emotional and thematic climax of a movie like this is a taxi driver with a comedy Cockney accent, something has been desperately lost along the way. To call The Nest an unhappy movie would be to understate the matter. There's not a single cheerful, well-adjusted character in the production. Not the venal, overreaching father, Rory O'Hara, Jude Law, or his wife, Allison, Carrie Coon, or his son, Ben, Charlie Shotwell, or his stepdaughter, Sam, Oona Roche. When we first meet them, they appear to be just another ordinary, upwardly mobile American family. But when a tantalizing employment opportunity seduces Rory to uproot his brood and bring them to England, things start to fall apart. The Nest is an autopsy of the disintegration of the middle-class dream and its impact on those for whom it becomes a nightmare. It's a rumination about the fragility of happiness. It's a modern-day horror film with a spooky mansion, a body that refuses to stay buried, and demons that haunt not the benighted halls of the house, but the unsettled corridors of the psyche. For a while, The Nest gives off the vibe of a conventional horror movie. All the elements are in place. The happy family moving to a different country and taking up residence in a sprawling, isolated mansion. There are even a few throwaway shots of dark, gloomy hallways where something might lurk in the shadows. One night, when the parents are away, Ben hangs out in Allison's room, afraid to be alone. But there's nothing supernatural going on in The Nest. This is a tale of domestic strife and family dissolution. It's about a man and a woman who no longer connect, either as husband and wife or as mother and father. Rory becomes obsessed about making a big score and replenishing his diminished bank account. Like a gambling addict, he's convinced the payday is just around the corner. And in pursuit of that dubious and unobtainable goal, he gradually loses everything. The performances are sterling. Law, a chameleon who can change his appearance and demeanor to suit the role, begins the film as a likable fellow with seemingly boundless enthusiasm about his new job. Carrie Coon is a portrait of deterioration, stable and happy at the beginning, brittle and worn down by the end. Law and Coon play well off one another. The chasm that opens between them is as believable as it is sad. There's something both universal and specific to their circumstances. One can read into The Nest a parable about the toxicity of the pursuit of money or a singular case study. Writer-director Sean Durkin ended his 2011 debut feature Martha Marcy May Marlene on an ambiguous note. He repeats that with The Nest. The final shot is ominous in its own way, but it's left up to the viewer to answer the question of what happens next. By the time the end credits arrive, the viewer has gone through the emotional wringer with these characters. We have caught glimpses of them at their best, but seen their worst in great detail. Although it's tempting to call Allison a victim, it's evident from her behavior and self-absorption that she's as bad in her own way as Rory. When she stands up for herself and stops playing Stand By Your Man, it's less a moment of triumph than an inevitability. The children are left to fend for themselves. This isn't their story, but Durkin uses them as a means of illustrating collateral damage. Sam's face and eyes often express a wordless judgment of her parents' ineptitude. Her borderline contempt metastasizes into open defiance when she hosts a teen party at the mansion. There are no consequences. Her father is absent and her mother is on the verge of a breakdown. Eventually, Sam and Ben decide almost matter-of-factly that it's up to them to take care of themselves. They can no longer rely on their parents. If Durkin is interested in a sequel, he could do worse than catching up with the children a decade into the future. As character studies go, The Nest is compelling, if not enjoyable. Observing such a precise dissection of a marriage's collapse is a sad business. Durkin doesn't court any fantasies about romance and reunification. He's relentless in the way he explores how Rory and Allison maintain an air of civility as their amity turns into enmity. The movie never goes full into the ugliness of the War of the Roses, but that was a dark comedy and The Nest isn't. This is either a tragedy or horror movie, depending on your point of view. Maybe in truth, it's both. If you didn't know better, you might almost imagine that The Nest, writer-director Sean Durkin's long-awaited follow-up to his debut Martha Marcy May Marlene, 2011, was inspired by a lost Henry James novel. Although it's set in the mid-1980s, this story about an Anglo-American family fraying at the edges after a transatlantic move is a hyper-nuanced study of marriage mind games, cultural misunderstanding, and stifling gender expectations. a beautifully modulated chamber piece played by a crack ensemble led by Jude as a flashy Cockney on the make, and Carrie Coon as his increasingly disillusioned American wife. Think Portrait of a Lady's Isabel Archer, but chain-smoking and wild in the sack. The nest lingers long after the final credits. It may not have the same surprising newness that juiced the debut of Martha Marcy, but it casts an ineffable spell nevertheless. A key collaborator for Durkin here is Hungarian DP Matthias Erdely, who worked with Durkin on Southcliffe, a limited series set in the UK about a town surviving a series of shootings. Known for his cinematography on Laszlo Nemes's Holocaust drama Son of Saul, composed entirely of close-ups, Erdely devises with Durkin a shot list that follows a rigorous if enigmatic logic, favoring long-distance takes outside and protracted master shots indoors that keep the characters at an inscrutable remove but seemingly cohesive as a group. Once we get to know the characters better, the camera literally gets up close and personal with them, even as the family members become isolated from one another, seldom together in the same shot. When first met, the O'Hara clan looks like a Ralph Lauren double-page spread come to life. While dashing English import Rory Law brings home bacon from Wall Street, his wife Alison Coon runs a riding school near their suburban home. Her smart-mouthed but basically sweet teenage daughter Sam, Oona Roche from The Morning Show, from a previous marriage has a warm relationship both with Alison and her stepfather, and even gets on well with her little half-brother Benjamin, in-demand 12-year-old Charlie Shotwell, Captain Fantastic. When Rory comes home one day and tells Alison that the Manhattan financial scene is in a slump, and he has a great opportunity to build something from the ground up if they move to London, she's decidedly unsure, especially since Rory doesn't have any family back home to help them get settled in. But even her own mother, Wendy Crewson, is of the opinion that the reason a woman gets married is so she doesn't have to make decisions anymore. With little more than a dissolve cut to mark the shift, the move is made, and Alison and the kids pull up in a taxi at their new home, a sprawling 19th century neo-Gothic mansion in the Surrey countryside with lofty high ceilings and acres of surrounding land. Having shipped Alison's beloved black thoroughbred stallion Richmond over from America, they hire builders to construct a stable and practice arena, while the kids get settled at new schools. However, despite his impressive bullshitting skills, Rory is not the whiz kid he makes himself out to be. The much-touted new opportunity in London effectively depends on his being able to persuade his old boss Arthur, a splendidly splenetic Michael Culkin, into accepting a buyout from an American company for which Rory would get a finder's fee. When that falls through, the bills stop getting paid, and Alison is forced to become the first farmhand in the South Downs to own a chinchilla coat. Sam falls in with some wilder local kids from the area. "Let's get some speed" is arguably the most authentically 80s youth speak in the movie, and poor lonely Ben is being bullied at school. Even Richmond is failing to thrive in his new paddock. Durkin writes in the film's press notes that the film was partly inspired by his own experience of transatlantic living as a kid in the 80s and 90s, and how struck he was at the time by the vast cultural differences between the two places, a gap much narrowed today. The film's spooky editing rhythms and Erdely's masterful use of penumbral backlighting enhance that disjointed, out-of-kilter feeling. Meanwhile, Arcade Fire's Richard Reed Parry's string-led soundtrack adds a spaced-out melancholy vibe that's both classy and faintly menacing, and represents an interesting contrast to the choice cuts of vintage mid-80s Britpop, including early tracks by The Cure, Bronski Beat, and the Thompson Twins. Just as musical in its way is the orchestration of the performances, which start out quiet, pastoral, and piping, and become an operatic, ferocious din. This is especially true during a climactic sequence that sees Sam throwing a party at the house, while Alison and Rory's marriage approaches a breaking point at a fancy restaurant with clients, and Rory's affable colleague Steve, Adeel Akhtar. Coon, in particular, displays some of that phenomenal range that those familiar with her work on HBO's The Leftovers and on stage with the Steppenwolf Theatre Company have come to know. Durkin really lets her rip here, with shots that just hold on her face as emotions flicker past like fast, scuttling clouds, and sequences where she gets to show off a physicality that's mesmerizing without any dialogue. Law, in excellent form here, nevertheless seems sometimes eclipsed by Coon until he gets a powerful, if somewhat on-the-nose scene with Anne Reid as his hard-as-brass mother. My favorite scenes in the film, Carrie is an actress I'm not familiar with. At all, apparently she was in Avengers Infinity War, but unrecognizable in CG makeup as son of Thanos warrior minions. But I'm very impressed with her. Here, there's an effortlessly cool vibe about her, and she has a palpable chemistry with Law. British-Pakistani actor Adeel Akhtar and Irish actor Michael Cullen are both reliable character actors. Both lend memorable performances as Rory's colleague and boss respectively. Overall, I admired Durkin's talent as a filmmaker, even though I'm not overly fond of the film. As I mentioned above, there's a sense of dread throughout. This one isn't exactly a pleasant film to watch. I'd still recommend it to film enthusiasts, as I think it's well crafted, though I'm not sure this film would be a hit with mainstream audiences, despite Jude Law being in it. Other information about this film: is it a ghost story, a parable of family dysfunction, or perhaps a fever dream of neoliberalism's troubled birth in the Thatcher-Reagan 80s, and the special relationship of greed and good? Or is this rivetingly strange movie an adaptation of some 70s or 80s novel that we had somehow all forgotten about, something by Iris Murdoch or maybe Pierce Paul Reed? The Nest director's filmmaker Durkin is first since the intriguing Quasar-Manson cult drama Martha Marcy May Marlene from 2011, and however much it feels like an adaptation, this is his own original screenplay, and very original. The setting is the mid-1980s with news about president on the radio and everyone smoking indoors, and the story begins in the Handsome by Jude Law. He has made a fortune as a commodity trader in Manhattan, and one morning high-handedly tells his American wife Allison Carey, stepdaughter Sam Oona Roche, and young son Ben Charlie Shotwell that he has accepted a job offer from his old boss in the city of London. Restless mercurial fast talk. Rory evidently has a yen to return in triumph to his old stamping ground and maybe cautiously reconnect with his glowering widowed mum, a terrifically potent cameo from In Reed. The Nest begins in America, with Allison and Rory. The little family of four is happily living in New York when Rory gets a business opportunity from one of his former employers back in London. Although they have moved 4 times in 10 years, Rory feels this opportunity will be life-changing and is too good to pass up. He's also ready to move back home. It takes a while, but Allison is finally persuaded to leave her extended family and move to London. Rory arrives in London shortly before the family does and begins to get their affairs in order. He had promised his wife and children a large house and many other riches, and upon their arrival, this looks to be fulfilled. They move into a very large country manor with space for a stable for Allison and a soccer pitch for Benjamin. Rory is reunited with all his friends from London, and life for the family, as they live lavishly without the income to match as a result. Rory begins to feel the pressure from himself and his wife to fix their urgent money worries. This combination of internal and external pressure begins to break Rory's mental state. Will Rory be able to prove to his wife that leaving her family and life behind was worth the move, or will he end up worse than before? Rory is one of the protagonists in the film, and on the surface he seems like a good-natured and hard-working dad, but once you are past the surface, one can see there are many warts. Rory grew up poor, and due to this he has spent his entire life trying to escape his childhood by becoming rich and successful. Although he does try to work for this success, he spends his money quite often. Even when he doesn't have the necessary funds, he makes many risky business deals. He lies and he exaggerates how much money and wealth he has. He proves to be selfish by not worrying too much about his family and never taking responsibility for anything. Allison is the other protagonist, and we see that she enjoys her life in New York with her job and proximity to her family. They seem to have a good life. When Rory decides to move the family to England for his work, her world is turned upside down as she and her kids are uprooted to a manor in Surrey. While at first Allison tries to make the best of things in this new country as she moves her horse to England with her, she is a riding instructor and she tries to trust her husband. The constant changes begin to take a toll on her. She begins to go crazy in the manner, not trusting Rory, getting into fights with Rory and her daughter as she and her family turn into different people. And her marriage crumbles. This movie is quite plain. It has an interesting horror thriller feel that lasts almost the entire movie, but nothing ever comes of it. The director Shah. Durkin does a wonderful job of maintaining a strong tension throughout the entire movie, while that tense feeling is present for the entire movie. It didn't hold my attention for the first 45 minutes. The character development that occurs at the beginning lacks any kind of hook to grab the viewer's attention. The back 45 minutes are more attention-grabbing, and although there isn't much that occurs, it does a good job of keeping the viewer's attention. The acting is very good. Jude Law portrays the ambitious, greedy husband quite well, and Carrie puts on a great performance with the vast range of emotions. That is by far the most impressive thing about these two performances. The vast range of emotions that both actor and actress were asked to portray. This is quite an emotional movie, and they do a good job of adding to the tone. While I enjoyed the acting, I didn't enjoy the characters or the writing. I found the characters to be two-dimensional and very predictable. This goes for the writing as well. The dialogue seems slow and forced. I found the two children to be total filler with very few lines or impactful moments on the film. They could have been written much better and incorporated in such a way that could have better developed the plot or even some of the other characters. My biggest issue with this movie is the ending. I don't want to spoil anything, but I found the ending was very open-ended and lacked the closure I was looking for. It left me looking for another 10 minutes of the movie at the end with no real ending occurring. The Nest is not bad, but it also isn't good. I found the negatives to outweigh the positives, and I probably wouldn't go see it again. I'd rather watch Malcolm and Marie. But if you find yourself enjoying drama movies or Jude Law, this one might be worth a try. More detail. It's been years since Sean Durkin's feature-length debut, Martha Marcy May Marlene, a chilling tale of a woman adjusting to normal life after escaping a murderous cult in the Nest. We have a woman in an all-too-similar situation, though the threat is not so much a cult, but a husband whose ambition far outstrips his ability. The Nest pairs Jude Law with The Leftovers, Carrie, who should have an Emmy, to explore what happens to a family when it is placed under incredible stress in a massive rundown British manor law and take troubled marriage material that may seem overdone and elevated to incredibly cathartic levels of bile and fury. The Nest is one of the year's best features, and I hope to be able to see it on a big screen whenever that's safe one morning. In 1980s America, ambitious entrepreneur Rory Law excitedly tells his wife, Allison, that a new job opportunity awaits him in his home country of England. Though Allison is hesitant, this would be their fourth move in 10 years. She relents the family, including daughters Sam, Oona Roche, and Ben Charlie. Shotwell are soon after at their new home, a huge estate in the English countryside, though initially, enthusiastic Allison begins to realize the house is far too large for the four of them, and Rory may have been exaggerating about the potential lucrativity of his new job. What follows is the near undoing of a family, as each member faces a different sort of annihilation as the house threatens to swallow them all home. Now, I don't want you to walk away from this review thinking this is Monster House. There are no supernatural elements in The Nest, except perhaps the spells of suggestion Rory attempts on his business partners to varying levels of success. Maybe the relationship between Rory and Allison is a curse based on Carrie Coon's absolutely venomous line readings. And Law's effortless ricochet between slimy and pathetic Durkin's direction is, at the very least, hypnotic. This is one of the few films I've watched during the pandemic that kept me away from my phone. Though dark, I had no trouble following scenes deep in the estate or in a hazy bar with a killer 80s soundtrack like Martha May Marlene. This is not a film where things get better or morale improves. The Nest is a bleak look at two people who should probably leave each other and the children that feel their father's neglect. Despite that, it is genuinely fun. When turns on her powerful sardonic tone and tongue lashes law to submission, I was delighted by this marriage's disintegration, possibly because I haven't found myself in this perilous situation and hopefully never. Will I watch The Nest in a fixed state of unease, shoulders tense and set forward, even in a plush cinema seat, my mouth immediately drying out after each sip of my drink? Durkin's long-awaited second feature is a tense, quiet marital drama that I kept expecting to explode into an outright horror film, as if some baleful supernatural force would eventually reveal its role in this poisoned household's unhappiness. At a certain point, I accepted that was not going to happen. I also realized it was a horror film anyway, and had been one all along. But what's so disquieting about the O'Hara family? They're a seemingly close, clean cut for some. You might describe them as normal. If their effortlessly displayed wealth doesn't first make your eyes widen, Dad Rory Jude law works in stocks and shares, Mum Allison runs horseback riding classes close to their suburban New York home. Ben Charlie Shotwell, their 12-year-old son, and Sam Oona Roche Allison's teenage daughter from a previous relationship complete the well-adjusted picture. But there's something a little posed, a little unsettled about this family's bourgeois stability when British-born Rory impulsively takes a new job in his homeland. Allison complains that it's their fourth big move in a decade. Are they running from something or towards something? And either way, will the vast Gothic-style manor house that Rory rents for them ensure the kind of unhomely space that offers its residents more space to hide than to bond, be the sanctuary they need, as in his debut, the eerie cult deprogramming thriller Marcy May Marlene Durkin doesn't provide tidy answers or psychological maps to the root of his character's unrest. Rory's emerging backstory doesn't wholly explain his borderline sociopathic packaging of his own identity in his best, most cleverly cast role in Ian Law's nervy, self-aware performance gestures at the kind of soulful void you might just be born with, the extraordinary maybe more. Clear-eyed and outwardly raging, but Allison too is a puzzle we wonder. Whether marriage made her this discontented, or whether she unconsciously saw and sought Rory's discontent to begin with late ads capitalism. Yes, The Nest is a period. Peace, though, nothing about it feels untrue to the present, is the third partner in this union. It's the factor that allows them to keep running to avoid facing themselves while keeping their destination just out of view. Behind the next pay raise, status, property, or pedigree horse, that's the horror right there. Extra information. It can be riveting to watch a human face, even if it's not doing anything showy. Movies encourage us to do this more than any other art form because of the close-up, which can be marvelous when used correctly when the moment is right. And the dramatic scenario is set, and the viewer is dying to know what's happening inside the mind of the character. A close-up can be like a beam of light parting the heaven. It can be pure illumination. Such a shot occurs about a third of the way through Sean Durkin period drama, The Nest, after moving to Surrey, England with her stock. Broker husband Rory Jude Law, Alison O'Hara Carey attends a black tie dinner party, along with Rory and his new co-workers, Rory's jolly boss Michael. Cullen toasts Rory's hunger and acumen for sales, and he tells a story about how Rory phoned him up 6 months ago and planted the idea for this job in his head. Everyone laughs, but not Allison, because what he's saying doesn't mesh with what Rory told her. As Rory told it, he was called up out of the blue and offered a chance to move back to England for a job he couldn't turn down. Apparently, he could have turned it down. Allison and him and their son Benjamin Charlie Shotwell and her daughter from a previous relationship, Samantha Oona Roche could have all stayed in New York, where they had a beautiful house and a stable life after years of moving around for work, but that's not what happened. Rory took the job, and now Allison's stuck in England in this room with her husband who lies. Allison watches the speech standing next to Rory and other guests, all decked out in their finest evening wear. At first she's smiling politely, but her eyes start to waver, her smile fades, it comes back, but it no longer seems genuine. Her eyes betray the trouble Durkin and cinematographer Modest Early hold on Allison's face as they dolly in, and the frame shrinks from a wide shot of the crowd to a close-up. As we get closer to Allison's face, she gets noticeably more uncomfortable. There's nowhere for Allison to hide. We get to see the thoughts behind her eyes. The flush of embarrassment turns to betrayal and rage at the husband who lied to her. We get to watch Allison come to the realization about who her husband is, and we get all this without her saying a word. That's the power of a close-up, to be sure. Sure, it takes a performer as deft as Carrie to pull it off. She finally gets a big screen role, the caliber of her Nora Durst in The Leftovers, the small screen role that made her famous. And it takes a director like Martha Marcy May Marlene, director Durkin, who doesn't use the close-up as a crutch, but when the stars align, the performer and the camera unite in perfect service of the story. It's beautiful and riveting. The drama at the heart of the nest is contained in this moment of Alice's realization, but the rest of the film is superb. There's nothing surprising about the narrative direction of the film, as the O'Hara family is doomed from the moment they move into the cavernous mansion and sue the nest of the ironic title and the carcass of a home for people far richer and more powerful than they are. But there doesn't need to be misdirection or narrative surprise in this sort of story. There's enough drama and emotion in every family confrontation and enough craft behind the camera that the conventional trajectory remains enthralling. We watch the O'Hara family struggle to adjust to their new home, and in their failure to do so, they turn on each other. The massive home they live in is a triumph of art direction and offers a perfect space for the director and cinematographer Early to stage this breakdown. Early is one of the best in the business, having shot Son of Saul and Sunset, both features from his fellow Hungarian native Lo Nemes in the nest. Early uses his patented soft focus and deep shadows to transform the O'Hara home into a haunted house. The shadows swallow up the O'Haras in the corners of rooms as well, the way Durkin and Eardley frame them in the massive expanses of the home, emphasize the scale of the building, and show how impossible it is for Rory to ever earn enough money to buy things to fill the whole place. The house acts as a metaphor for Rory's pathological need to pretend to be more than he is. It's apparent to anyone outside of the family that the home is too big and ill-fitting for them, even if they were rich. It's the home of an Enlightenment aristocrat, not a stock broker with an American wife and 2 kids. But Rory refuses to acknowledge this fact. The whole family does in their own way. But the way that Jude Law plays this refusal is particularly stunning. Law's charm has always seemed something of a con, even in films where he's the uncomplicated good guy. There's too much mischief behind his smile in The Nest. That smile is something more of a grimace trying to mask the pain of his own self-hatred and twist it into something appealing. The man's a shark and doesn't realize it. The film plays heavy with metaphor in its treatment of the house and the predictable breakdown in the relationship between the couple and their children. Benjamin gets in fights at school. Samantha starts hanging out with riffraff. They fracture like glass under the pressure of their parents. Allison tries to channel her anxious energy into training her horse, a brilliant black stallion named Richmond, but Richmond refuses her training. He's easily agitated and grows ill as if infected by the rot of the home and family. His decline dovetails with the hot family's breakdown. The film's sole misstep is a later scene with the horse, where it becomes evident that Durkin may have never heard the old cliche about beating a dead horse. Aside from that, the film is without blemish. It's captivatingly shot and brilliantly acted by two performers with considerable talent. The whole film has something of the atmosphere of a horror film. The characters seem cursed, and you'd swear the family was haunted by ghosts in the Sir home in a way they are, but not of the horror movie kind. This isn't a horror film in the conventional sense. It's a marital nightmare in the vein of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and Revolutionary Road. It's the kind of film you dread watching with your spouse just as you dread going back to sleep after waking from a bad dream, because you worry you're going to see something you recognize that chills you to your bone. Jude Law's glittering and insincere salesman's smile has rarely been better used than in Sean Durkin's prickly domestic drama The Nest as brash British city boy Rory. He blasts the full force of his skin-deep charm, arms outstretched as he welcomes his American family to the 17th century Sir Mansion he has leased for a year with the option to buy, having unilaterally decided to relocate them all from a comfortable life in New York back to the UK to take advantage of the imminent deregulation of the 1980s financial market. Rory is fully invested in the move to this crumbling pile. The ostentatious, impractical house with its jutting turrets and the vacant volume gaze of its windows is a core part of the oversized identity that Rory is crafting for himself. It's not a home. It's a waymarker on a social climb, a capricious trophy wife of a building. No wonder then that the mansion starts to feel as malign in its way as the shining overlook hotel, as he already demonstrated with his accomplished feature debut. Martha Marcy May Marlene, writer and director Durkin, is supremely accomplished when it comes to subtly modulated tonal shifts with the introduction of a discordant note in the word. Upmarket restaurant jazz that constitutes the film's sly score plot, it's to Arcade Fire's Richard Reed Parry for creating music that sounds both impeccably tasteful and witheringly sarcastic. There's the hint of an imbalance that undermines the family's foundations in their new home, a mid-shot that catches the face of Rory's wife, Alison Fargo's Carrie, as she chews over the bitter realization that her husband has lied to her, lowers the temperature in the scenes that follow. By several degrees, the use of the unsympathetic architecture of the building is particularly effective. A shot of a child's toy dragged along a brick parapet creates a lurch of four. Boying the corridors of the house soak up light like blotting paper. Shadows eat away at the edge of the frame, and the sunny enthusiasm in Rory's 10-year-old son Ben gradually dims in the 1980s. Bigger was sold to be better, more money, fancy mansions, designer clothes, gourmet, food pricey bars, and rampant partying with plenty of drugs and high-end alcohol. Having lived through this era myself and seeing its successes firsthand, it's safe to say the Yep era catalyzed a new social dimum. Self-indulgent consumption was dangled before the public at large, whether they could access it or not, given so much ostentatious taunting with its concomitant yearning for upward mobility. Ugly entitlement inevitably followed. As a country, we've been on a downward trajectory since then. Call it Reaganism if you like, or call it Thatcherism. Filmmaker Shah Durkin's new film offers an uneasy hybrid of both forms of selfishness. Jude Law plays Rory O'Hara, a transplanted Brit married to Alison Carey. He's a stepfather to her teenage daughter Samantha, Oona Roche, and father to their 10-year-old son Benjamin Charlie Shotwell. They live in a perfectly lovely suburban brick house in a suburb outside of New York City with a Volvo sedan and a Jeep Suburban in the driveway. She works for a horse stable where she manages the riding lessons and enjoys access to the horses, including her favorite, a black beauty named Richmond. As the film opens to strains of smooth, unobtrusive jazz, we view the family's house through autumn leaves. Rory wakes Alison each morning with a kiss and a mug of coffee. There are dreamy scenes of Alison working with horses, family dinners, and Rory sitting at his desk staring blankly when Rory, a commodities broker, tells her he thinks They should move because his work opportunities are drying up. Allison's surprised and annoyed. She reminds him. They've moved several times in the last decade. Rory insists he has an excellent opportunity in London and convinces her. They need to take it after a brief goodbye dinner with Allison's family, with whom she's close. The family packs up for the transcontinental move. Richmond, bucking and snorting, is put in a trailer to be shipped abroad as well. The horse's loud protests feel like a warning. Rory has rented a grand 18th century mansion with vast grounds in the Surrey countryside. He greets Allison with a new full-length chinchilla coat and promises her they will have horse stables built for her. The kids start at the best private schools in the area. Rory returns to work at his old London firm. His boss and former co-workers are excited to have him back from the remote location. Every activity becomes a fraught commute. Richmond arrives and the stable construction begins. Allison is thrilled she and Rory have intense sex, despite that the enormous house feels overpowering. Allison keeps rearranging one small seating area. Sam blasts new wave music in her bedroom. Ben is afraid to walk through the dark hallways at night. The excitement of a new beginning wears off as the family members realize that they don't know how to fit into this grandiose lifestyle. Allison discovers that Rory's new job with its huge expenditures has placed them in precarious straits. The foundation of the marriage, based on willfully ignored truths, starts to collapse. Richmond wheels in distress from his stall at night, unheard by his loving caretaker, because the house is too far away. A series of small tragedies piles on top of simmering guilt, fear, and regret. This is a story of a family that implodes in the face of unexamined desires. Is it greed that tears us apart, or the inability to realize what we really want? It's tempting to call this a fable or allegory that distills the materialistic, ruthless spirit of the 80s, the Furies, glimpsed in films such as The Wolf of Wall Street, Trading Places, Wall Street Working Girl, Broadcast News, and others. But there's a tragic intimacy here. Director Durkin has crafted deceptively naturalistic moments that reveal intriguing glimpses of people who find themselves living a glamorous fairy tale life they're not sure they want. His debut, Martha Marcy May Marlene, was a slow-burning thriller about a young woman caught up in a strange rural cult. He has followed up that impressive effort with a film that is a bit harder to access despite its specific time. Frame, the actors aren't at fault here. Law continues to impress with his mid-career choice of roles. Coons gives a close-hewn performance of a woman whose life implodes after she realizes that she was literally sold a bill of goods. Rowe is perfect as a kind-hearted girl who becomes sullen in an unfamiliar environment. Shotwell turns in an understated but brilliant performance as shy, sensitive Ben. Equals the Nest would be best seen on a big screen, but alas, the times we live in make this difficult. The ironic cinematography by intimidatingly claustrophobic. There's a wild scene where Sam throws a party for a bunch. Mayhem is almost reminiscent of the authentic tour de force party sequence in Olivier Assayas's early masterpiece, Cold. Water, the music is pitch perfect. An original score by Richard Reed Parry. His debut as a feature film composer delivers a moody soundscape. So despite its somewhat aloof quality, this is a film worth savoring and watching closely, not to appreciate any intricacies of a plot, but for unexpected epiphanies. Occasional touches of horror make it hard to pin the film down in terms of genre or even narrative. But Durkin has shown us already that he has a gift for exposing humanity's dark edges, what lurks beneath respectability and good intentions. The Nest is a deeply personal story, unsettling, beautiful, moving, and haunting about that most public of sins, greed. This film, directed by Durkin, screenplay by Durkin, produced by Rose Garnett, Derrin, Schlesinger, Durkin, Christina Pesson, Amy Jackson, starring the Carrie Charlie Shaw, the R.O., the Deal actor, cinematography merrily edited by Matthew Hannum, music by Richard Reed Parry, production companies FilmNation, entertainment, BBC Films, Telefilm, Canada Element Pictures, Substitute Films. Distributed by IC Films, United States Elevation Pictures, Canada Picturehouse, Entertainment United Kingdom, release states January 26th, 2020 in Sundance. September 18th, 2020 in Canada, United States. August 27th, 2021 in United Kingdom. Running time 7 minutes. Countries: Canada, United Kingdom, United States. Language: English. Box office $2.1 million. So guys, this is the review of the Nest movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.